Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to Funds Economics. This time we will have a closer look into the ESMA, which is the abbreviation for the European Securities and Markets Authority. And in this video, this is the first part of two about ESMA. We will only deal with the historical approach until the point of ESMA's creation. Why do we do that? The reason, as it is my approach generally, I like to enroll developments by the history, since the benefit one has thereby is that one knows the surrounding of the creation and thereby the need of why it needed to be created. And that is always quite good to know, because thereby the organization is most of the time then determined, and their roles and so on and so forth. So, this is what this video is about. The second part will then deal with ESMA itself from the moment it was created. But I would really recommend to watch this first. Thereby, let us come to the overview so that you do know what you will know after this short presentation. Well, first of all, I will just need to tell you two things up front, and after that I will start with actually some short facts about ESMA, so that you are at least a little bit like in the picture of what ESMA is, and that you are not completely in the vast how is that called, limbo or something, in the nothingness about ESMA as an institution. That will be the first thing. Then we will actually start with the historical approach, and first part will be about EU's longing for an administrative body, respective rulemaking. Thereby we will find out about FESCO in 1997 and 2001 CESR. Thereby we will also have a look at the lump fallacy process. You will get to know that, what that is in a moment. And then the second part of this presentation will be the aftermath of the financial crisis from 2007-2008, of course, and as a proximate cause for the creation of ESMA in the end, effectively. Thereby we will find out about Article 289, 290, 291 of the TFEU, which was created actually back then, organizing some processes. And 2011, that's then the end of this historical approach video. Then you can continue with the second video with the establishment of ESMA. Alright, that just to give you an overview. Just two things up front. Mostly everything that I'm about to tell you in this video, also in the second one, is from the book The Age of ESMA, Governing EU Financial Markets. It's by Niam Maloney. I hope I pronounced it correctly. Published in 2018, Bloomsbury Springs, I wanted to say Bloomsbury Publishing, and the ISBN you do also find here in the video. Further sources are listed below in the description. You do also find the book if you want to buy the book. It's actually worth doing so, since it is very rich of information and is going into the processes on a very deep level, which is kind of nice for me, since I like this kind of stuff. You do not need to buy it in case you are not a freak like me. Find also the link in the description to the second part in case you are actually completely not interested in the historical approach in this institution, the ESMA. Alright, and the second point is a reminder, if this video is helpful or useful to you, that's the main thing, then you may be free to subscribe this channel. It is actually about financial regulations, but I do cover a lot of topics which do surround also the financial industry in Europe. Until now, Europe. Yeah, like the video, share it, do remixes with it, I don't know. Do whatever you can with it. So now everything that needed to be said is said, so we can actually just start with the actual content. So let us begin with some key facts about ESMA so that you do have a start, a basic understanding of it. So ESMA is, as I mentioned before already, the abbreviation standing for the European Securities and Markets Authority. Well, thereby, of course, one has an idea that this institution will be somehow about like supervision. It will be related to something like this. And, well, of course, one is right with this assumption. But let us go through some key facts. And these are, ESMA is actually established in the aftermath of the financial crisis, since, a financial crisis is not happening because of everything is working really great, but because everything is working really not great. And that was the situation back then. Well, the European Union was very eager finding a new way of policy making, a new way of market supervision to not let that happen again. That's what is standing in the history books. Well, so ESMA was established 2011. And how established ESMA itself? It established itself as a decisive technocratic influence on the governance of the European Union. So somehow one was right, it goes in the direction of supervision, of course. Headquarters in Paris, the same as the OECD, actually, to the effect of August 2023, there are 308 staff members within the ESMA. Actually, the SEC has, I think, around 4,000 staff members. And in the US are approximately 330 million people living. I think in the EU, to my knowledge, is more than 400 million. So the SEC has 4,000 staff members, 4,000 employees. And the ESMA has 308. It looks like Europe or ESMA actually is doing something very right by this statistics, or it says that the US is super bureaucratic, more bureaucratic than the EU, which I cannot really imagine. But how much is it? 14 times 14.5, 14.6. Yeah, it must be a little bit more than the 14.6th part of what the SEC has as employees. So they manage everything quite well, it seems. All right, how to define ESMA? Now, I mean, we know how it established itself, but how one would define it? Well, as a soft law-based, coordination-oriented agency of the EU. Soft law, is it the opposite of hard law? Yeah, actually, from the words, yes, but soft law meaning actually the same as the OECD. I mean, not the same as the OECD as an institution, but also if you saw the video about the OECD, then you do know that the OECD is suggestions to the ones they suggested to, which are the OECD countries, but they have no binding power. No, they have no legal binding power. That's actually what it means. And ESMA also does not have a binding power, but in some occasions they do have a binding power. And we will have a look at that later. But that is how to actually define the European Securities and Markets Authority. Since we covered that, who is actually the current chair? And that is effective 2023, August 2023. The current chair is Mrs. Verena Ross since November 2021. Yeah, that's how she looks like. And the executive director is Natasha Kazunev. However, since June 2021. Well, so actually prior than the current chair. Members, who are the members of the authority, of this authority, of the ESMA authority? Well, of course, all national authorities within each EU country, meaning there's Germany, the BaFin, In France, there is the AMR, and so on and so forth. I mean, I don't have to go now through all the national authorities in terms of market supervision and security supervision. All right, I think you should know yours. I mean, the one from your country by yourself. Well, that is it about the current chair and the members. All right, and now we are already coming to the last slide of this pre-introduction, or however, about these key facts here, these short facts about ESMA. How do they actually describe themselves? Like, since now I just mentioned how the book describes it and how, yeah, well, I describe it myself. Yes, also my own personal opinion is going into this presentation. Well, but how do they actually describe what they do? And you can find on their webpage the description like investor protection, point number 1, point number 2, orderly markets, and point number 3, financial stability. Meaning, well, they just offer you an explanation which explains you actually not much, but gives you more like a vector in mathematics, the direction in where it is going. Well, it's actually everywhere the same. If you do listen to these short videos, I don't know what you actually know afterwards about it. Since, I mean, that it is a markets authority, and that a markets authority and a securities authority regularly deals with investor protection, well, who guessed it? And orderly markets and financial stability, well, but therefore we do have this video here. We will find out by the end of this video that ESMA is, well, is really low-key by stating things in these 3 points, what they are doing, because ESMA gained a vast influence in an incremental way. Generally, we will see that that is generally how ESMA is operating. They do actually everything on a very sustainable basis, but we will come to that in a moment. Well, in an incremental way, in the last years, they gained influence in very, very many areas in which they did not have had that influence before. Okay, for the next, let's say 30 minutes, try to look at the history approach under this angle. As an EU agency, ESMA as an EU agency, ESMA as a traditional market regulator, as an international standard setter, as an EU network actor, horizontal peer coordinator. Well, and these are only a few things. Just try to coordinate which processes were responsible for this development, which we will now go through in the next minutes. All right, thereby I think you do have now the key facts at hand. You have an overview about what ESMA is. So let's have a look how this very ESMA was getting created. Well, and it goes actually back quite a time. We will have a look at that right now. Let's start with the actual topic. How would you actually coin ESMA? I mean, besides that I gave already the definition, how would you coin it? Well, how about to understand why, I mean, how ESMA was coming into existence, so to speak, we need to ask ourselves why there was a need for ESMA. So what is actually the basic function of ESMA? And that is, it is an administrative rule-making body for the European Union in terms of markets and securities. All right, so, and thereby it is interesting to know then that there was actually a long longing of the EU for exactly that, an administrative rule-making body. Why that? Well, because as one can imagine, EU is consisting of many states, which do all bring with them their own, well, regulatory framework, which can make it complicated. And at what time it is especially complicated? Well, always then when the world is about to change, or social structures were changing. We do find the first very faint attempts of the creation of such an administrative rulemaking body in the late 1970s and the early 1980s. Of course, the early 1980s and not the early 1990s would be strange. Well, and that was the contact committees, so-called contact committees. And what are contact committees? Well, the name is a speaking name. These are committees which are in contact with each other in this particular situation. There were committees consisting of regulators of the national authority, which then came together trying to, assimilating the processes or making it actually easier for cross-border transactions, things like this. The problem is, like, good ideas which do fall on not fruitious, what's the name? Fruitious? Fruitable? Fruitable, not fruitious. Well, would be a nice word, sounds funny. Fruitable ground, what happens with them? Usually they are foundered, and exactly that is what happened with also these contact committees, which were in existence in the late 70s, early 80s, but the process was just, the communication was not, it was super long, it was complicated to actually get anything. Everyone was falling asleep before anything was actually said, and therefore, it foundered, as I mentioned. So, but thereby we see how long the EU is already trying, or at least parts of the EU, parts of their legislative framework generally was already trying to establish such a thing. So the need, and that is already now, like 50 years ago. Am I right? Well, no, it's not 50 years, it's 40 years, 45, something around that. So it's still quite a long time. It's older than many of my viewers, I guess. So it's a long attempt. Imagine you try something for 45 years. It's not that fun, maybe, depending on what it is. All right. So the contact committees weren't working. The first serious attempt of creating such a body was in 1997. Why 1997? I will talk about that in a minute. But first of all, what was it? It was called FASCO. It was coming then in form of an institution, and that name was FASCO. And FASCO is, of course, the abbreviation. We will deal today with a lot of abbreviations. And FASCO is standing for the Forum of European Securities Commission. This was established and created as a forum between regulators, actually also created by regulators, for an informal forum, for an informal exchange. It had no binding powers. And, it was more or less, what it is, a forum. So now let's just get back to the question, why 1997? Why not 1955 or 1900 whatever, another year? Well, that was due to, in the late 1990s especially, there was an increasing complexity in regulatory issues as well in financial issues, due to also significant changes in technology. We remember, maybe some remember, many remember, maybe Windows 98. That was the phase in which technology was rapidly, developing into new markets. The market itself was growing, and actually new markets were created there by the evolution of technology. So thereby there was a need for coordination, actually. But it was not only that. It was also an answer and policy answer on the current happenings in that time. Well, it was not 1997, but 1998, for example, was the Russian financial crisis, which was actually triggered by a debt default and, a currency devaluation. And so this was also happening. Not only the Russian financial crisis was ongoing in 1998, but also the Asian financial crisis was just happening, recently. These were not global financial crises, not to the level of the 2007, 2008, but anyways, their impact were quite significant. As well as, for example, there was the LTCM, I think it was called, LTCM, yeah, long-term capital management. It was not that long-term in the end. 1998, I think. Yes, also this hedge fund, actually a particular sub-fund of this hedge fund, collapsed completely. And it collapsed actually due to risky trading strategies, excessive leverage, and unexpected convergence of financial markets. That's what I mean, like financial crisis in Russia, Asia, and so on and so forth. And it was also due to that the assets of the fund were kind of illiquid, but also the market itself was not that liquid. So actually, therefore, it could not just push everything off and not cause a systemic risk, because this was a systemic risk collapse, so to speak. I think in the end, 14 banks were bailing LTCM out. And not only banks, it was also financial institutions, but with whose money? Well, of course, with yours, since that is just how things are. When money of a pension fund is bailing something out, that is actually your money. That is bailing out actually risky trading strategies and excessive leverage. This was the situation in the late 1990s, and that actually screams for reform, as it just screams that. And that was exactly what was, well, coming back then. And the first serious attempt, as mentioned, was the FASCO, the Forum of European Securities Commission. But there's been a problem with FASCO, because FASCO did actually not have such a big impact. Since it was designed as a forum between regulators, from regulators, it did not have much influence, and generally it was, so to speak, a very first try of something like that. So, but it's been significant for, it was actually a good template or something to build up on for the then in 2001 established CESR. To explain what the CESR is, I will tell you what the abbreviation means in a second. Therefore, one needs to know the Lamfalussy process. And yeah, so let's just cover first the Lamfalussy process, because then we go more in a chronological way into it. Right. So what is it about this Lamfalussy? The guy you do see here is Mr. Baron Alexandre Lamfalussy. Mr. Baron Alexandre Lamfalussy is actually already dead, but excuse me, he was actually living from 1929 to 2015. Otherwise, he would be reverse aging or something. Well, the guy with the big notes here in his hand is this very Lamfalussy. He was an economist. That's the guy to whom we have to give thanks for having the Lamfalussy process. Well, what is it? Well, Mr. Lamfalussy came up with it, and Mr. Lamfalussy states, first, principles. Second, technical standards. Third, coordination. And fourth is enforcement and implementation. Actually, the other way around. But who cares? Well, these are the multi-tiered steps within the Lamfalussy process. So, as you see, it is a way of organizing things. As soon you start having heterogeneous entities, groups, whatever, and you do use these kind of approach, you will always have a way of organizing all groups in a better way, in a more harmonious way, in a more coordinated way, a structured way, which is exactly what the reform was screaming for. Therefore, actually, well, this whole thing was coming up. But I've mentioned in the beginning, so now we do know the Lamfalussy process. More about Lamfalussy. Also, just give me a minute. I wanted to say the CESR This abbreviation is actually standing for the Committee of European Securities Regulators, that was coming into existence in 2001, was part of this multi-tiered approach to financial regulation due to the Lamfalussy process. And now a question, in which level they would be localized. Imagine it is, so to speak, the development, the evolution of, reformative evolution of the FESCO. So where would the CESR be in these four principles? Would it be in the principles part? Would it be in technical standards? Well, no, it is of course in the coordination, since the FESCO was installed as a forum of exchange as a soft law institution with no binding powers and so on and so forth. Well, the CESR mainly operated as a level 3 entity, a tier 3 entity of the Lamfalussy within the organization of the Lamfalussy process. Yeah, it wasn't the only thing. I mean, the CESR was also involved in technical advisory to the committee and to the different national authorities, and thereby, of course, they were also partly involved in the level 2 and entity 2 in the level 2 process. Mainly the CESR was part of the institutional reform that was taking place from 1999 to 2001. Why actually? There's something I forgot to mention priorly, and that is the FSAP. There was another reason why a reform was needed. FSAP is actually standing for the Financial Sector Assessment Program, is conducted by the IMF. The IMF is the International Monetary Fund. They have a lot of abbreviations. Since 1999, so 1999 was the first time an FSAP was conducted. Actually, the FSAPs, they're only conducted by the IMF for the more advanced economies. Well, that is the IMF's code, not mine. But the results back then were not very good also. So also these FSAPs were speaking for a reform. I mean, everything was speaking for a reform, just that came to my mind right now, and I didn't mention it priorly. What was the role then, more generally, of the CESR? It was the consistent implementation and application of EU, securities laws, and also regulations across member states. That was the job of the CESR. It had, not much more binding power, as I mentioned already, than the FESCO, but it was more structured, since it was now part of the Lamfalussy process as well, and was also in terms of fulfilling their duty, so to speak. We're also conducting peer reviews, which were actually founded by the OECD, providing technical advice, as I mentioned as well up front, and also was promoting convergence of the regulatory approaches. That's actually how to describe CESR in a sentence or in a few sentences. The CESR actually influenced the creation of other level 3 institutions in other financial segments. So as banking, for example, in banking it is the European Banking Authority, the EBA, which then was created later as part of the ESFS. More abbreviations, yes. And just that also to mention. Okay, so now we do know what the CESR actually was, since it is somehow not in existence anymore. But how was it with this Lamfalussy guy? So this Lamfalussy guy was not just an economist that came its way and said, hey guys, I would recommend you to do it my way. No, he was in 1999, actually prior to 1999, 1994 to 1997, he was the president of the EMI, which is standing for the European Monetary Institute. actually, this is to circumscribe as a predecessor of the ECB, which later then was also created. And so he was not a nobody. In 1999, he found himself suddenly as chairman of the Committee of Wise Men. Maybe you have heard about them. Mysteriously. This is a committee suggesting things, ways, direction, vectors in certain questions. And they do have a kind of an influence. So actually nowadays this Committee of the Wise Men is not called anymore, I mean you can still call it that way, but it has also now the name, the Lamp Fallacy Committee. So he actually changed the name of a committee. Did you do something like that? No. Well, of course not he himself changed the name, but it was happening, well, not due to himself. Hopefully, at least. Would give not a good credit if that was the case. This committee was tasked 1999, Lamp Fallacy as the chairman, to find a solution. I mean, to find a reformative approach to which had to be regarded as the sclerotic legislative processes within the European Union back then. And, well, he, of course, followed this order, and after various conversations, research, after he's presenting it, he had been presenting it to the Commission, to the Parliament, I mean the EU Commission, the EU Parliament, and so on and so forth. After various consultations with the public as well, then it was finally presented in 2001 to the European Council. That actually helped a lot, drawing attention to the need of a reform. And that was how Lamp Fallacy, actually was in the position to create something like this. Because I asked myself how this guy was, how this process, how he was just able to establish this process. Well, that's the history behind this. And now you do even know about Baron Alexandre Lamp Fallacy, this, yeah, well, friendly-looking guy. All right, so remember, we are now at the CESR, we are in the year 2001. The Committee of European Securities Regulators is now in existence as part of the Lamp Fallacy process, which is designed approaching in a multi-tiered way, the regulatory framework within the EU. I'm also able to do my hair. Well, but let us continue. Just, even though we now have an idea of what the CESR is actually from an institutional viewpoint. Anyways, I want to just get it to the point, so to speak, to make it super clear. And the CESR to the point has like 4 points. And one of them, I mean, the first one, how I would summarize it is, the CESR's duty was legislative measures adopted by the interinstitutional process. I mean, that was one thing. Then the second was administrative rulemaking, which was adopted by the Commission then. Third is soft measures adopted by the CESR, and thereby meaning also coordination of the NCAs. The NCAs are the national authorities in this case. And yeah, not only in this case, generally. And the fourth point is the enforcement of action, actually, by the Commission. All right, these are the 4 points you have, ESMA, I wanted to say, CESR, the predecessor of ESMA, to the point. That is resulting, in therein that it still remained a soft law body until the end of its days, which was 10 years or so. Well, it had no binding powers. When did this situation change? When the crisis of 2007-2008 was happening, or was taking place back then, well, of course there was a need for more regulation and of course a need for more coordination of markets, since the markets were like going crazy completely, and well, it was not a nice time. not only for markets, actually for human beings. Well, 2007, 2008 was then the Copernicus point from the CESR, which was by then already established for 10 years. Then over the time, from 2007 to 2011, is still 4 years, but I mean, like within these 4 years, it was then merging to the ESMA. And ESMA, as we know what the ESMA is by now, hopefully. But ESMA was not actually only created as ESMA. No, ESMA was created as part of a system that should take care thereof that actually something like the financial crisis of 2007 would not happen again. But it did, of course. But they try. And this system was called the ESFS. And actually the ESFS is standing for another abbreviation, as I told you, we are dealing with a lot of them today, for the European System of Financial Supervision. And it includes 3 institutions, and 2 of them you might know. One is the EBA, the European Banking Authority, and then ESMA, of course, the European Securities and Markets Authority, and then the more unknown candidate is the EIOPA. Excuse me, this is just, I have now a haircut, but no voice anymore. European Insurance and Occupational Pension Authority. Yeah, I know, it sounds quite interesting. Well, the good thing is we are not dealing with the EIOPA in this video, but with the ESMA. So just take it as given, EIOPA. These 3 things together were building the ESFS, yeah? As, so to say, an umbrella for not having financial crises just bouncing around the world. Because nobody actually enjoys them. I mean, there are people that enjoy them, but one has to imagine, one has to also think of it, that until then everything was done on a national basis by the NCAs. That is, complicated, as you can imagine if you do have a little bit of creativity or imagination, actually. All right, enough with that. The ESMA was constituted as an independent EU agency with actually now, finally, more extensive powers than the CESR. CESR, yeah. I always confuse it with another word. So how was that now taking place? That now we do have extensive powers. How actually the actual creation process of ESMA then was taking place? How did it look like? Yeah, that's what we will have a look at now. Ladies and gentlemen, we're coming close to the end already of this presentation, of this history presentation. There's still more. There's actually a lot more on the channel. You can never get rid of my talking voice. We should just continue. So now, as I mentioned, we are coming close to the creation of ESMA, and thereby the end of this video, which might be, well, a reason to breathe again for many viewers. And now, ladies and gentlemen, we will have a closer look into ESMA Regulation Article 17 to 19. Why that, you may ask? Is it so important? Why do I have to care about that? You don't. You can stop this video, turn off your computer, go out and have a life. It is up to you, actually. But in case you want to listen, of course, I would provide you with the, thereto belonging material. ESMA Article 17 to 19 are actually stating a binding power. So now we do have the binding power. First time that we call it, to impose decisions on NCAs, so national authorities, national competent authorities, and market participants are as well included in, and now take care, underline this part, in identified exceptional circumstances, meaning not all the time. When was the last time in your life that something identified exceptional was happening in your life. Well, depending on which kind of life you're living, might be yesterday, might be many years ago, depending also on your age. But all that doesn't matter to this presentation here. Certainly in these circumstances, ESMA has binding powers towards the national competent authorities. I think I'm getting crazy. If one has a closer look now into Article 9.5, there is actually another thing stated, and it is the enabling power for the conferral on ESMA of additional exceptional market intervention powers. Is that clear? Do you know what is meant thereby? No, me too not. If there's a lawyer watching, if there's a European law specialized lawyer watching, please tell me, what are these additional exceptional market intervention powers that ESMA is able to Red Bull. Drink it if you want to present longer than you can. Okay. So, if there's a lawyer, please tell me. In the end, we do see, okay, they have now binding powers in exceptional circumstances. They do have the additional exceptional market intervention powers as well. And anyways, yes, the ESMA is not a law-building institution. No, it isn't. And it won't. But it is a soft law-based institution still. It is that way. Yes, and that means ESMA's powers are limited and actually exceptional. Even though, well, ESMA is influencing a lot of things, which you will find out about in the second part. But what about supervision? I mean, ESMA is not only intervening, but actually most of the time more engaged, if there's not just a crisis happening, in supervision. ESMA can go back to the same, or to a similar, better to speak, supervision kit that also the CESR was having. What about regulatory governance? Here it becomes interesting regarding Chapter 5 of EY's reference book. In terms of regulatory governance, ESMA has extended powers. We will see that when we will have a look at regulatory governance issues, situations, actually guidelines, they are also called, that were coming to life by ESMA, powered by ESMA. For example, MiFID and all these ones. Well, so how was it then working all this thing? Because it was not just that ESMA was coming up. I mean, I told you, like from 2007 to 2011 it took that ESMA was then finally there. So it's quite a time. And in between, well, actually forming also ESMA's existence, or the way it was possible to come into existence, there was a Lisbon Treaty. Yeah. Do you know what the Lisbon Treaty was, or is, actually? Was, well, however, in 2009, actually on the 1st December of 2009, the Lisbon Treaty was coming into force. It was signed by all European countries in 2007 already. So that something comes effectively into force can still then take 2 years. Well, the Lisbon Treaty is a renewal of the Maastricht, or Maastricht. I don't know how to pronounce that in English, excuse me. The Maastricht Treaty from 1992. What's the Maastricht Treaty? Just save it in your mind as the TEU. That is the Treaty of the European Union. So to speak, an update of the Maastricht Treaty from 1992. And then, what else? Actually, the Lisbon Treaty was updating 2 of these very treaties, and the other one is a little bit older. And the other one is the Treaty of Rome from 1900, let me see, 57. Quite a time ago. Well, What was the Rome Treaty? Well, actually, the updated version within the Lisbon Treaty of the Rome Treaty is then what we call nowadays the TFEU, the Treaty of the Functioning of the European Union. If you want to have a closer look into that, just Google it and actually read all of it. It will take you a lot of time. Don't do it. Just know that they are existing. And then actually, once the videos are released about that, watch the videos. Just to know stuff. Alright. The Lisbon Treaty, besides that it was updating that, I mean, by updating these other treaties, it renewed one, and thereby decided one very active war within the European institutions and the political institutions, meaning the Commission and the Council and the Parliament. Because even though there is a European Union, there can still be war in it. No, of course not a war, but let's call it like unsolved, unresolved issues in terms of decision-making processes. Well, and that has been going on for a long time between the Council and the Parliament. The nature of and the control over administrative rulemaking. Yeah? Who is doing what? There's the Council, there's the Parliament. If you do not know about these institutions, you can go actually to EY's reference book, chapter 2. Yeah, in this video I think I explain a lot about the Council and the Parliament. Yeah, I think it should be the second one. Or you just read the European Law Journal number 22 from 2013. If that is, yeah, well, if you just enjoyed that more, you can do also that, because there it is also stated in detail what actually happened here in this regards. And what happened was the creation of the Article 289, 290 and 291, and thereby by 90 and 91 they solved the issue within the TFEU of delegating and implementing acts, the ongoing battlefield between these two institutions, since they were not able to decide, okay, in which case it is a delegating act that differs the rights, the veto rights and decision-making processes and so on, and in which case it is an implementing act, for which it is then again different. Well, and that was now decided, but actually it has been, it had been, that's the right tempus, I guess, it had been already decided way earlier that this process was already existing before, and it was possible to do the same distinction that was made then by the already installed mechanisms that were in place. That were actually the RPS, which is standing, next abbreviation, which is standing for Regulatory Procedures with Scrutiny. RPS are actually regarded as direct predecessors of delegated acts. So ESMA was accordingly charged by advising the Commission on delegated administrative rules in accordance with Article 290. 290 is the first version, meaning delegating acts, with proposing of a regulatory technical standard, RTS. It's also an abbreviation that is good to just have in mind since it is appearing everywhere. Well, that's Article 290 as mentioned, and then the other one, 291, is implementing technical standards. So, a sharp decision, ladies and gentlemen. Due to the Lisbon Treaty was also the Article 289 implemented, as I also mentioned hitherto. Is that correct? The right word? Yeah, hitherto. Fancy English words. This article actually states EU lawmaking as, well, legislative rules. They are eligible now. All right. Well, Now one can ask, okay, what is actually then changed by the current framework? I mean, since we know about the RPS, which was existing before, now what is changed thereby is that now these 290 and 91 is designed actually also by under the influence of the Lamfalussy process. And due to these articles, now the parliament has three rights regarding delegated acts by the commission, and that is first the veto right. Second, it is to bring action for annulment to the CJEU. Don't ask me. This abbreviation, just remember it as CURD. Something European CURD. There's not only one of the European CURD, but we won't go into that now. Third option is they can revolve delegation for the future, but this is actually bound to some specifics, in which we also won't go into, since this is not a law channel, even though one might think so. No, one is actually wrong. But a question for the attentive listener. What is now going on with the cases coming up at the CJEU? That remembers me of GDA San Andreas, CJ. As you see, my concentration is going a little bit below zero. What happens with these things going there now applicable as delegated acts, for example, and in former times there were these RPS. How to handle them now in a law case? Yeah, that is the question to be answered by European lawyers, European law specialized law firms. Yeah, actually there has only been one case in which the parliament used one of these rights to block something from the commission. The concentration is really low, but you know what is a good thing? Thereby we are actually now arrived at the establishment of ESMA as an institution. Yeah, it is 2011, ladies and gentlemen. ESMA is coming into place. It is existing. And this video is done. You've made it. Now watch, of course, directly the second and all other videos that you can find on this channel with full concentration and a smile in your face. Thanks for watching, ladies and gentlemen. Have a good day.